South Africa began the day at a precarious 43 for 4, and despite David Benningham's fighting 45, Aussie skipper Pat Cummins steamrolled the middle and lower order with figures of 6 for 28 to rout the South Africans for 138. But the South African quicks responded to leave Australia 144 for 8 in their second innings at the close, an overall lead of 218. Alex Carey so far led with 43, with Mitchell Starc 16 and Nathan Lyon 1. The not-out batsman against 3 for 35 for Lungi Ngidi and 3 for 44 for Kagiso Rabada. Fazia Mohammed joins us again to discuss yet another intense day of action. Faz, at the top of the show, we were discussing the position of this contest and who had the advantage going into day number 3. I was reading the Crick Info headline saying Australia ahead. There's an ABC headline that Lance pointed me to that suggested that the contest more evenly poised. How are you seeing it at this stage?
I'd say this time Australia definitely ahead, because it means that South Africa, to win, have to get the highest total of the match. And given the way they were exposed today, and of course late on day 1 with the top order, I think we're going to have to see a really excellent effort by the South African top order and maybe some sort of resistance lower down if they're going to get a total next to 220, 250. It doesn't sound like much, but when you put it in the context of what we've seen over the 2 days, I think Australia have the edge.
Yeah, and when you look at day number 2, do you think South Africa let Australia off the hook? They had them in all sorts of trouble in this second innings before that 60-odd run 8th wicket partnership between Carey and Mitchell Starc, who is still unbeaten on 16.
Yeah, and let them off the hook, yes, in a way, but again, you have to credit the Australians for the way they play their cricket. For example, Alex Carey was bold trying a reverse sweep on day 1. I mean, in the normal course of things, what we would call traditional test cricket, he'd be condemned for that. But while they haven't adopted the England style of going hell for leather, what they've termed baseball, some of their players are very much of a positive nature and they look to score at every opportunity. So yes, South Africa, with a bit more intensity, with a bit more accuracy, with a bit more determination, should have been able to break through that 8th wicket pair, but they couldn't, and indeed Starc and Carey took advantage of every scoring opportunity. And that's the key in conditions like this. It's almost as if 50% of one, 50% of the other, half of one, half of the other, that if you look to be attacking, you could get out. But if you look to be too defensive, you're going to get out sooner or later. And therefore, it's about taking your scoring chances where they can, and trust yourself to be able to capitalize.
Yeah, and Faz, one of the things I noticed is the commentators, of course, praising skipper Temba Bavuma for his use of Lungi Ngidi after tea, saying that, you know, he took off Kagiso Rabada, which many people would not have even thought about doing because Kagiso, of course, was bowling pretty well, brought in Lungi Ngidi, which would have been a hard decision, and of course got results right away because Lungi was able to pick up a couple of quick wickets. What's your take on Temba Bavuma and how he went about, you know, with these bowling changes?
One of the issues, Mariah, with someone like Temba Bavuma as captain of South Africa is that he's under the microscope, whatever he does. On the field, off the field, batting, bowling, how he speaks to the media, how he dresses, where he goes, who he fraternizes with, because, again, he is a black captain in a nation that is predominantly black, but a media that is still predominantly white controlled. And therefore, there's a tremendous level of almost examination of everything he does. And he's handled it extremely well. As I said, coming into the match, you have to have a thick skin being involved in South African cricket, and especially being captain. But to your point, I think he's someone who's grown in the job. Nobody is born an automatic leader, never mind what people may say, and you learn as you move along. And he seems very much comfortable in his role as a leader of this South African team. And that decision to go with Lungi Ngidi again reflects his awareness, his knowledge, his understanding of his players, because Ngidi is the type of bowler, he's a bigger man, he's a more strapping individual, gets a bit more bounce, a bit more of that spongy type of bounce off the surface, while Rabada is that skiddy type of bowler. Very effective as we saw on day one. But again, it worked for him earlier today, and you will have to wait and see how things go, how quickly they can polish off those last 2 wickets of Australia and then go after whatever target is set on this day 3.
Yeah, one of the things I like to do is after an intense day of cricket like this, listen to the post-match interviews, hear from the players, hear from the captains, what they were thinking. And Lungi Ngidi in that interview after the match said, what's for sure is the viewers and the spectators are going to get their money's worth where cricket is concerned. So I'm getting the mindset that they're planning to bat and not give us what we saw in the first innings.
Well, they may plan. Australia will have their plans as well. And that's the thing. You've got to be positive. You can't go into a situation and say, well, we have to win with the highest score of the match. And given how we fared in the first innings, I think it's 80-20 Australia right now.
Yeah.
You can't do that. You've got to be positive. You've got to think about how you're going to get these runs, whatever those runs are. But you've got to take it one step at a time. When you listen to these players, these sportsmen and women, talk about these various challenges, they try not to get too far ahead of themselves. Take it one step at a time. Let's get those 2 wickets first. Then we'll see what the target is. We'll assess the conditions. Will there be some sunshine? Will the track ease out a bit? Even if it does, it's still Stark, Cummins, Hazelwood, Lyon. And we've already seen what Pat Cummins did today. Not just take 6 wickets, but softening up Kagiso Rabada just a bit. He might be an easygoing individual off the field, but he's a very intense, typically Australian character on the field, is the Aussie captain, Pat Cummins.
Yeah, and Faz, you just referenced the way the Australians play cricket and the way they go about building innings and so on. I remember Brian Lara, when he was captain of the West Indies team, had credited the Australians for taking the Test cricket approach to a different level because of how quickly they scored, and they would take games away from you because of how quickly they scored. And mind you, by the time Lara was captain of the West Indies team, the Aussies had surpassed the West Indies and became the world's number 1. Players like Adam Gilchrist and so on. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because you just said that they're not quite like the Bazball England approach, but it's definitely a positive approach.
Yeah, I think there's a definite difference there, Lance, between England's Bazball thing and the Australian way of playing. Because the England way borders on recklessness. And it's almost as if they enjoy that. I think the coach Brendan McCullum talking about running towards the danger, that kind of fancy language and so on, to make it sound almost heroic, to be looking to reverse sweep a Jasprit Bumrah or something like that. I think the Australians, they're wondering what all the fuss is all about, because they'll say, we don't believe in all of this manufacturing sort of thing that is going on that the English are doing. We play positive cricket. We come here to play positive cricket, and this is not something from 10 years ago, from 20 years ago. This is how they've always played the game. And that famous tie test of 1960-61 at T, when Australia had 6 wickets down, and some might have said, it's better to shut up shop and play for a draw. Richie Bender was going for the win. That's why we had such a fascinating finish and a fascinating series. It's in their culture. It's their way. It's obnoxious at times. It's too much in your face at times. But their way is to get on with the game or get out.
Yeah, and to that point, I would suggest that while their lead at the moment is 218 and they appear to be wrapping up their innings at 144 for 8, it's not beyond the Aussies, Faz, to see them scoring beyond 200 tomorrow and making things even more difficult for the South Africans.
Precisely, because you've got Mitchell Starc, who could really lend bat to bowl. You've got Nathan Lyon. You've got Hazelwood, who'll try his best to hang around. Although, as we saw when Shamar Joseph cleaned him up for that famous victory, he may not last very long. But again, it's about once they are there, runs will come. And that is the challenge for South Africa. When play gets underway, early tomorrow morning, our time, they've got to wrap up those 2 wickets very, very quickly, because if it goes for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, it's another 20, 30, 40 runs that could really push it beyond the reach of South Africa.
Yeah, and just finally, Faz, as we were discussing the state of the game at the top of the show, Ricardo was mentioning that he isn't convinced that the batting quality of this South Africa lineup, together with the potency of the Australian bowling attack, gives the South Africans much of a shot here. And he pretty much thinks that, and you have said it, you think the Australians are ahead, but the analysis that Ricardo has given is pretty much on point.
Indeed, and we were talking about that on the eve of the test match, weren't we?
Yes.
That it could hinge on how the South African batting copes with the Australian bowling. And we've already seen that in the first innings, all out for 140 and change. So now, even as we speak, maybe they're already asleep, I don't know. But Shukri Conrad, Temba Bavuma, the other senior players, they might be discussing, look, how do we go about this, whatever the target is? Do we just take it as it goes or take the game to Australia? Is that too much of a risk? Is that something that we can do, or should we just play it as it comes and hopefully capitalize? So there are many different variables, but I agree with what Ricardo is saying, that at this point, given the obvious vulnerabilities in the South African batting lineup, I think Australia have a distinct advantage.
Yeah, Faz, I've been looking at the numbers at Lord's dating back to 2016, so that's 9 years ago. And the last 16 test matches played at the venue, only, the last 15 test matches, only 2 have ended in drawn results. So we've had 13 victories in the last 15 test matches played at Lord's. But this surface, more than any other I can think of, seems to favor quality bowling and potentially a quick result. And I wanted to get from you if you think there is pressure for the curators to ensure a surface is put forward that essentially almost guarantees a result, given the fact that it is a final.
I think there would be an element of that, but I think it's almost a given now, Ricardo, the way the game is played. Because you remember, for a lot of these players, they'll be coming from T20 into test match cricket. So there's already that tendency to be attacking, to be going at the opponent, going at the opposition. And that almost inherent nature of decades ago, of building an innings, of digging in, of really setting your stall out for the day, that doesn't necessarily apply anymore. So even with the pitch with a bit of juice in it, and I think, yes, it obviously has something, it's quite obvious, but I don't think it's unplayable. I think what you've got to factor in is an era where so much of the game is abbreviated. And for the vast majority of players now who go on a test tour or play a test match, they don't have 5, 6, 7 first-class matches, 21 days of traditional cricket before a test match. They are basically playing nothing other than a few net sessions, having come out of 7 or 9 weeks of T20 cricket going into a test match. So even as much as they fight to discipline themselves, there's that automatic tendency to go at the ball, and that could land you in trouble.
Yeah, very much the case. Fans, as usual, thank you so much for joining us. I suspect we'll chat again tomorrow at the conclusion of this World Test Championship final. Take care, Faz.
It would be a privilege to me, but unfortunately I'm unavailable tomorrow. So I'm begging off from early on this occasion.
Thanks, Faz. Thanks for the heads up. Appreciate it. We'll talk again soon, sometime. By the way, Lance is already on his way out, and that's because he's